Do I look as dark as I feel?
Yes.
Should we adjust this lighting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Although this might suit the work
Is
I'm
this
gonna
gray?
read, but
I don't know.
I
What happens if we do none of those?
Other side, I believe.
Other side.
Oh, behind here. Now let's all watch me step on things and fall.
There we go, right?
Whoa. Is that too much? Right, Michelle, if you want to be dark and stormy.
no, this is great. No, I prefer this.
All right.
Dark and stormy.
All right. This is our first sort of trial run with live streaming events while we're doing it here. How are we doing over there? We're good. We're good. Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Hello. I'm Dan Rosenberg. I'm the director of the Wells Visiting Writer Series, and I'm really thrilled to welcome you all to this reading, which is the sort of capstone event for Michelle Gil-Montero's her residency for this week here at Wells College. I do want to start off by thanking Dean Cindy Speaker for funding the In-Residence program, which supported this week's residency by Michelle. I also want to thank NISCA, the New York State Council for the Arts, which has supported our Visiting Writer Series for many years, and it allows us to keep bringing events like this one to Wells and to the wider community, even through the pandemic, which we've been doing virtually. And finally, I want to thank the IT team, especially Mike, for making it so that our audience from beyond Aurora can join us tonight via live stream. I've been really moved and thrilled by how many people from outside of our little community have been attending things virtually for the past year and a half, and how many Wellsians and people connected with the college who have moved on have taken the opportunity to come back virtually when we put these things online. And so I hope that we're able to continue to do that going forward. Finally, I want to acknowledge that Wells is on the traditional land of the Huga Nation, which is a member of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And now I get to introduce our reader, Michelle Gil-Montero. But introductions after a week together seem silly. Michelle arrived on our campus on Monday and immediately shared some brilliant and tantalizing ideas about monstrosity and translation. One of my colleagues who attended that talk just brought it up to me again today. He'd been thinking about it and wanted to continue the discussion, which is to say the impact of that event was not ephemeral. Michelle's ideas have staying power. Then on Tuesday and Wednesday and yesterday, Michelle worked with a small group of students, faculty, and staff at Wells to letterpress print this broadside. Actually, you can see some of the process stages here, and some of the mess that we made as we tried to make it work. And that's what it ultimately ended up looking like. And you can see the process docs on the table over there and the finished products on the table with the books that are for sale as well. And students set most of the type for the poem, and everyone collaborated to imagine, design, redesign, set on the press, then redesign it again, and finally print this beauty. And I want to single out Chris McCormick, who is here with us right now. In particular, he's an Aurora resident with deep ties to the college, and he spent several long hours with us troubleshooting and proofing and finally printing this broadside. So thank you, Chris, for all of that incredible help. Michelle will read the poem tonight, and the broadside will be for sale at the end of the event, along with books by Michelle and books published by Michelle's Press. While she's been here, Michelle has also offered a generative poetry workshop using Antoine Berman's ideas about translation to help us create new poems in English. And she visited my course on poetic form and meter to talk about Spanish versification and the embodiment of rhythm in language. I was particularly excited to see one student who's doing her senior thesis project on issues of translating Pablo Neruda scribbling furious notes during that talk. We asked Michelle while she was here to do a lot, but there was also a fair amount of time this week for her to be, in fact, an artist in residence, to enjoy the rare gift of solitude and support that allows writers to write, thinkers to think, makers to make. And tonight we're going to get to hear a bit of all of that from Michelle. She's a poet whose most recent collection is Object Permanence from Untitled Press. And we'll hear some recent and some brand new poems that she has written. She's a translator from Spanish. His most recent projects include The Edinburgh Notebook by Valerie Marcasso, which is out from Action Books, and Berlin Interlude and Exilium, both by Maria Negroni, forthcoming from Black Square Editions and Ugly Duckling Press. She'll read some of her translations tonight as well. And she's also the founding editor of Eulalia Books, which is a small press poetry publisher. She'll also share some of the work that she's been championing and publishing through Eulalia as well. So lots of different hats, and so this is going to be a sampler of the various kinds of work that Michelle has been doing. She's won fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Howard Foundation, as well as a Fulbright U.S. Scholars Grant to Argentina and a Penheim Translation Prize. At St. Vincent College, she's a professor of English and director of the minor in literary translation. But here at Wells, she's been a writer, a teacher, a scholar, an artist, and a friend. And we're so glad to celebrate her work tonight. So please welcome Michelle Gil-Montero. It's fine.
Oh, wow, Dan did such an eloquent job of describing what has been a really lovely experience for me. You all have such a beautiful place to call home, school, and it's just been quiet and lovely and generative, and so it's just been such a pleasure for me. And I really want to thank Dan for this invitation and for camaraderie in the letterpress studio, and for, you all have such a wonderful force of good to guide you through the pleasures and into the pleasures of poetry. So it's been wonderful to see Dan in that role. So this reading is really nice for me and different because I get to, as Dan said, wear these different hats. So I'm going to start with a poem from a book that I did not write or translate, but published. So I'm starting with my champion hat on. And I want to say something maybe before I start, which is that wearing all of these hats, being a publisher, being a translator, teaching, all of these angles of approach to the poem really do add so much dimension. And so I really encourage you all to look for other avenues. If you're writers, if you're poets, if you're translators, try to sort of come at what you're doing in as many ways as possible, because it really is. It's been such a pleasure to do all of these things at once this week, and to really think about and reflect on just the process of sort of going back and forth and thinking about poetry in many different ways and encountering it in many different ways. So as publisher, I feel very proud of this book. This is the first book of Colombian poetry written by a woman to appear in English, which is stunning. And so it was exciting in terms of just correcting that horrible underrepresentation, or beginning to correct that horrible underrepresentation. But also, as Olivia Lott talks about in her introduction to the book, it's just a beautiful book. And in many ways it resists the weight that's sort of put on its shoulders inevitably by being the first. People look to it and say, okay, well, I'm going to learn about Colombia. I'm going to learn about violence in Colombia through this book. And you're not. You're going to be sort of delving into the unconscious and into the strange imagery of Lucia Estrada, who lives in Medellin, Colombia. So I'll start with one of her poems that I love. Note found in the margin of a poem by Anna Akmatova. We don't share a name, but birds come to die at my window too. We don't look alike, but my gaze takes off in motionless goodbyes. If only I'd made up my mind to run after what shines just for its own bliss, instead of sitting still. If only I'd been able just to skip rope, stumble to the heart of the party. My mask of bones makes the world seem so far away. How guiltless would I need to be to get it back? But here's where I'm always looking the wrong way, dislodged ear, almost mute, eyeing the suits not cut for me, stale legacies of weariness. Dust will bring us all together, you say. Still, my feet fade too soon, helpless at grasping, at tracking down a single sign. They are the fear of all places, slopes, solid ground. Listen, something in this scream is for you, you say. And don't go looking for what you only glimpse in other eyes. Night has left the two of us completely blind. So that is Lucia Estrada from Colombia, and the beautiful translation of Olivia Lott. I will start with a couple of poems from my book, which was also published by a small press, and that's nice. It's nice to enter the bubble of small presses, collaborating and lifting each other up. It felt very right for my book to come out with a press that has some of the same goals and impulses as my press. And it was right around the same time, actually, that I was starting this press, that I was looking and thinking about what I would do with the book. This book is largely thinking about, it's called Object Permanence, and it's largely thinking about, does anyone know what that is? Kind of like if you're a parent, you see like object permanence boxes, and it's a thing in early childhood that if you read any parenting books, you'll encounter it. But it's part of a theory by Piaget about a child's learning to understand that even if they can't see something doesn't mean it's not there. So a sense of the stability of the world, even if it's not right in front of you. So that became a really interesting meditation for me on presence and absence, which is something I think about as a translator, definitely. But it also kind of has always been something I've thought about with languages and with language. So this first poem is sort of a direct inlet into that thinking about presence and absence. And I'll tell you that it has a date, 10/27/2018, which, am I doing the thing where I talk? I'm going to talk for an hour about this poem, and I'll read it for like 30 seconds. But I'll say it quickly, that it has a date. The date, oftentimes I write in response to catastrophic things, whether they involve me or not. But they don't really read as poems of occasion or tributes or elegies. And this poem is none of those things, but it did happen. It sort of tumbled out of me one morning after driving my daughter to dance class and seeing all these ambulances, and there was a shooting in Pittsburgh at a synagogue really close to my house. So for whatever reason, I just sat down and wrote this poem. Creation story. Shadow. It fell spatial. I mean, its distance pressed down. Crushed surface. Dark is the absence of light. Light is the absence of absence. Shadow twirls its cold mantle in space. Tell the child whose finger spins our loaded globe, day and night. Instead of talking about the darkness, always there, absent, show her about day and night. Shadow her about it. Say, this mist fills Pittsburgh. It learns us the melancholy logic of bodies pulling through. Mist is the presence of absence. Miss them, miss us. his ceaselessness. Seasons. A lot of my poems are pretty short and intense, little nuggets. Seasons. Spring's green gone, blue hills shine immune, and in that light, desire is last to scatter. Small white animals are quicker to feel and forget a glance. With them we live a little less present. End of fall, you are only solid as a bird, and every verb arbitrary, animates dead leaves that dance its heat of least materials. No, alone is toneless tone, the new kitchen, lucid with disuse. One, she counts, or is it none, undone, erotically, ice crushed in the ice-textured glass. The sign specifies live girls as flashes of debris to see. On the side of the road, floral box, spring and the dandelions. Yellow's wee ease, cheek by gel blooms of ripped gut grown. I tried July and all the shallow seas burn. Hard-lived water in the harbor, you hold still, so clouds move over you. Where am I in relation? I am pacing myself. I can never read Bataille while eating or break an egg cleanly in one hand. On sad days, anything reads as an epic. Is the broken egg less naked than the shell, more innocent than the hand? It snows, a filling meal, a thin line of pat sparrows, a fire, a failure to fit into that scent, murky pink of sweated sugar. What if you love something you can only own by arson? We are wakeful. It leaves a grave circle. In speech, a secret speed. Voices age, husked, othered, equally by nudity and cover. Is it richer, the kiss through cloth, however confused? White bag of fruit, last of the season. You can hear the fact that I think you can hear in this sort of rock-like materialism of my words as little rocks to stack up, little sound rocks, how much I love that materialism in language, and that's just where it's at for me. I used to be very self-conscious about reading because I felt like people wanted me to tell them stories. But then I was like, you know what, people can just enjoy this music. So I think, that's probably, I think we could probably talk about connections between working as a translator and picking up, ideas and words and working with them, moving them around, and maybe letterpress and, setting words in a line of type in a composing stick, and the materiality of language that excites me. So I'll read some new poems, and then I'll read a couple of translations, and then I'll share a little more of what I've been publishing at Eulalia.
Michelle, did you want to?
Oh, yeah! Thank you, I forgot about this. So, the new work I'm doing is part of something that I think is called cloisters. And so I've been doing a lot of erasures just generatively for fun, as visual poems. And I'll just, keep flipping them around so that you guys have something to look at. besides my masked white face. So I'll leave it on the first one. There are 10 that I shared here. I don't know what will happen with them. Actually, for some of them I did hear. Some of them are coming out in a journal in a little while, a week or two. And I'm thinking they might kind of bookend some of the poems in, I don't think I am making a manuscript of erasures or visual poems, but I think they might be a part of something else I'm doing. So I'll start with the Little Red Hen, which we spent a lot of time with, some of us. The Little Red Hen, I call this a self-loathing poem, but I think it is. I think it's fundamentally a self-loathing poem. It experienced while reading The Little Red Hen over and over again and being annoyed with her and annoyed with myself in her. But also, it's kind of a self-loathing poem too. And I think I struggle a lot poetically with the role of the self and the coherence of the self. I mean, definitely because I'm working in translation and like, where am I in that work? But also just generally as someone who doesn't have any skill of telling stories from a stable position. So, so this is a self-loathing poem too. The Little Red Hen. Who will help me, said the Little Red Hen to herself, to plant this grain in the ground, to ground this little I found. Who will help me, she grained, to thresh and flesh and fold, to grind this heavy sack of myself by myself. Then, she henned. I, she selfed. I will eat myself, she helped. The end, went the Little Red Hen to herself. Providence. This is a sad one. There are a lot of numbers. Providence. The rising sun freezes for a moment, right where seeing ends, forces its soft, bright body through the bars on my window. My window when I was 20. Under the bed that the last tenant left, a box of photographs, black and white, intimate. I admit I had no friends. I had no father either. One of the pictures was silk, another was knitted, each worn over an anonymous part. Why bother to identify, I thought. The sun is a body, foreign as you are, in a box on the corner of Hope and Fair. Soon it's new again, blood in your eye from the other night and all the crying. What is the last thing you remember? Iron lines cutting a sullen figure against the sun. Pellets of shape. I wrote this in 10 minutes here, in a really fun, exercise, poetics exercise, when we were working with translation methods as a writing practice. So this is a deformation of a line from a wonderful Dickinson poem where she's writing about the experiment of the poem. She's talking about it in really scientific terms. So it works from the line, while cubes in a drop or pellets of shape fit. And I guess pellets of shape seem like such a challenge. Like, can I deform the pellets of shape? So pellets of shape, a deformation. Pallors of sheep, petals of sheets, pelvis of shark. Oh, pills of sleep, poppies of slip, postures of slop. Oh, post-its of scrap, paddles of slack, piddles of shame. Piles of same, panics of seam, pillows of skimp. Panoramas of screen, penumbras of scream, Pandora auras of dream, peafowls of scrim, puffins of scum, pullets of scruff, oh pell-mell of sloth, puddles of self, palavers of sleep. That's about insomnia, I think, too.
I'll post it.
This is the kind of stuff I think about in insomnia. Structure. There was a collapse, as when story after story rests upon the unsustaining softness of the world. I heard a rumble. I tiredly pressed against it. I assumed a storm over the ocean. It thundered under me. I almost called you from the balcony. The air had vanished. There was just a wad of nerves and plaster, the wilted pad of a finger. Only the saddest particulars. A window garden, an empty pedestal. Everything was out of order, singular, and in suspense. At the sight of collapse, cause and effect are simultaneous. There's no need for witness, which is a special kind of loneliness. Steel yelps like a dog as it fails. Everything, like sound, becomes dust, then air. I almost called you to drive me to the rubble, to bring me here. I have a bunch of waiting room poems in this new manuscript I'm working on. And here's one of them. This is a weird one. It takes the form of a kind of a questionnaire, or maybe the kind of thing a receptionist would ask you. But it's really about like feminine self-loathing. Waiting room. How do you prefer to wait? Scent of lactation and white that blues when wet. A wall of fish, somber flashing. My gaze freezes to glass like fish, blazing gray, wrapped in wax paper. Is this your current address? Placiest places I can muster, garbled metal and kitchen lichen. Pretend it's the house of a stranger, so much sieve, so much hard preparatory scan, under the pucker of bladed stars. What to kiss first? I'm naked as a rock or the bark of a tiny dog. In a dead man's dress shirt, a child's smock. Kids play, and later there's egg in the grass, sticky, tackled into a knot. What are you waiting for? Find a point that rots as you watch it. A hotel to visit, a harbor, stars. What a barrel of ice. What a sad white napkin of Asti Spumanti. I'd make a stupid bustier on the hotel ghost tour. I want to stay in the room, wrapped in the lace of spontaneous waiting. It's okay, I'm only playing. It took me weeks to freeze all these layers. Find a point and toy with it, torture it. Here lies Poe, the unhappy, in the ditch of his own proclivities, in this dereliction of the sea. Is this your signature? Red when cut is white. At least that's how I think of poison. A face powdered down to a distant likeness, then bright lipstick. I answer the front door. Fall mums, flowering brown and bitten. The whole yard watered too hard, so now it peddles death. Now it fruits dirt. In a red apple, a white bite, hungry for my mouth. Any new symptoms? No bird bath, no birthing trough, but feathers and muzzles bloom. Poetically, I'm plucking the clock clenched in my knees. Please stop watching me cook. Wait, there's no meat under the feathers. Please pick meteor flowers. Domestically, I am peering over a miniature, an oval mirror, and a gentle iron frame. I hold it like an egg on a spoon. Keep it cold so it will never hatch. Lift it to my ear and listen. more of mine. I've never read these before, so I'm experimenting on you guys. This is a silly one. Alhambra. Do you guys know what the Alhambra is? It's like a big red palace, sort of a Moorish palace in southern Spain. Very beautiful. It has poetry on, I think, some of the doorways. It's there's a lot of text in it. It's a tourist place, but I've always wanted to go. Alhambra. It also sounds a little bit to me like, well, lots of words in Spanish that begin with al are Arabic words, but it also to me sounds like hambre, which is hunger. Alhambra. It's a nice word. Alhambra. I had this murmur, this tremor in my mouth, this whisper of running water, now overgrown with wildflowers. I had this thought of the Alhambra, this chalky color caught in folding hairs. I thought it with my bad origami, desperate to make a square of color spatial, to make nothing emerge as anything, anywhere. Have you been to the Alhambra? Red echoes cream one hungry archway than another. Reedy, grimy punchways of erasure. I have this desperation for space that still propels me to set an elegant table in the middle of nowhere, to fold all the wrong mirrors of paper, just so. I have this sympathy for possibility. All those times I never toured the Alhambra, I never even murmured the word or folded its tremor into paper. Okay, so, well, I keep forgetting to change these. Here's another one. I'm going to switch gears a bit. And you guys hanging in there? All is good? I'm going to read a few of my translations of a Mexican poet whose work I've had the privilege to translate a few times now, Valerie Marcasso. This book is very important to her. It's the book that she wrote after her brother committed suicide in Edinburgh. And she never, she was living at the time in New York. She lives in Mexico now. But she never had, there was no funeral. His remains were never returned. And so this book symbolically has a lot of weight. I talked a little bit about it on Monday, but it really is for her, in many ways, the grave of her brother, and also sort of the body of her brother. And his suicide note comes in to some of the poems in the first section. And it's a book that does a lot with collage. It's very section-y, and Valerie is also an artist, so it has some collages and some visual work interspersed. So that's all I think I need to tell you. But don't expect all these poems to sound like they're about somebody, because they're just all over the place in many ways. They're dealing with grief through all kinds of different inlets, outlets. Third, there is spurious morning, night of the night. There's a tree flayed by a giant. There's a cracked vessel on an avenue of laurels. Someone taller than this house writhes in a cry that disjoints the neighborhood. Their crepuscular faces that break the day and suffer their race. They twist at the waist of a wave. They shriek like birds in heat. I hear your voice saying its say. I hear its will railing through my body. Voice that, flapping its arms, hacks through the crowd. It's a falcon of words. It is lost in Brooklyn. It had better snow, and soon, or else the giant will rain so hard that the day will drop from the night like a lopped-off arm. I love you. You feed me from an impossible host. I love you. I hear your wings tearing apart in frenzied flight through the deep trench of my chest. hurry, hurry, holy bird. Valerie says that poem is about the Holy Spirit. And that's why it's third. But I did not read it that way when I first translated it. I think it can be read in several ways. Before living, I'll say, okay, so I picked some translations to read where I take some liberties or where I can really hear myself in them. In this one, La vieja luna volvía, the old moon was coming back. But I changed La vieja luna to the crone moon because it was so much better in English for me. And so that was a fun one. So I'll read this one. There's lots of little things like that that happen in this translation. This has an epigraph. Every wall is a door. Emerson. Before living. The crone moon was coming back. The window was open, my body dead asleep. Somehow she lights me from within, slides into the clefts of my brain. She lights the seed, the crone moon, sunset. She comes, I go. I'll be a dark room for her return. I'll be hers alone. A dark room, first a motionless girl, then a girl tumbling off a flat roof. It could be a song, a dream of broken bones, moon bones. You know that snow is implicit in the scene because we're freezing. Your face, especially your eyes, surface in space. An orphan constellation that shakes and rattle. That's how I see your eyes when I dream, motionless. The limping moon and orphan constellation are two solitudes, and at the same time, inchoate lights, songs soon to exist. First your eyes, then the eons of the world and orphanhood. I take a breath to mutter something. I'm leaving, that's why she's coming. She returns on that road where she once turned her back to us. And watching her return, I'll wreck the piano, and the dust of its bones will sound mournful, and that possible song will replay like a piano. Strewn, the dust might make something of itself at night, with no father or mother. And that, whatever it is, will resemble a lament, and it will save me. Or so I suspect, as its wet luminescence cuts creeks through my uncharted lands. Valerie is a very beautiful poet. I love her language and I love working with it. And there's a lot of room to I don't know, make my own sort of music with it. Here's the last one I'll read from this book. It's a little long, not that long, but comparatively. This is, there's a backstory here. It's part of a series called Movements, and each of these is sort of little ars poetica, and each of them is dedicated to someone. And this one is dedicated to the poet Forrest Gander, whom Valerie translates into Spanish. He was also my professor and totally the person who pulled me into translation. So this feels sort of special because, this is to him from her, translated by me. So I love this one. And she talks about translation. And I also kind of, I screw with this a little bit in key places in ways that are fun for me and that Valerie totally accepts and likes, I hope. Second movement from the translator for Forrest Gander. If you could see me right now, you would see me sleeping. You would see me weeping, out to sea. That's what I told you when I was reading on paper in foam lines your Japanese poem. The windows choked with light fog, and two bundles of orange roses awoke like fish fluttering in a waterless tank. This is the scene. Winter fades and withdraws its long fingernails from my door. This is how I sleep, how I tune to my daughter's breathing, the occasional airplane, black skin that empties its lungs on Sunday. It's very early. Last night, I tried to find better words for your poem that whirs in summer. Clangor of light as the sound of metals and also the shine. So we've seen and heard. What you write is true or visible. It parades down the street with girls beating tambourines that beckon and release light. How tedious to repeat it. What road could be more endless than the road of everything that's not poetry? That's how I pictured symbol of light, and I wrote it down at the odd feet of your pages, which you leave like the shoes of little girls. At the window, I see my breath, which fogs the image of my neighbors starting out in hats to sing next door at church. I watch you dream, the waves of a dream. You wrote a poem in Japanese, and as I read it, I heard you speak, and the sea heaved its green bulk and thinned into filaments. It was a poem of sad abandon, and the worms of melancholy wriggled freely in the sand. Nothing underground but rock erecting the world. There was no fear of sentiment in saying sea. The word was safe in another language. There were metallic sentences that crashed together in a successive brilliance in waves. Eventually, I'd have to accept that I couldn't translate it. The poem would set off like a ship and be gone, dwarfed on the horizon. The thought of it made it rain in my dream, and it was darkly clear that the rain was me. The poem was pulling away, and I hadn't found the right words. Now the street is full of black birds lurking at the church door under the downpour. A barefoot girl appears in the lintel, and then, once again, everything is underground. Okay, I'll stop with this. I'll leave it there. And I'll end on, are we good time-wise? I'll end on a few poems from the book that just came out from Eulalie. I'm really, really excited about it. And this is my first time working with this translator who's just so brilliant and wonderful. And this book is just so well translated by her and conceived by her and thought through by her. And her name's Robin Myers, and the poet Daniel Ibarra, who is also a translator into Spanish, is just, this is his first book, and it's crazy. It's crazy of us to publish a first book. That doesn't usually happen, but that's what the kind of stuff we like to do. And it's a book-length poem. How could I sum it up? I have a nice book description I wrote, but it's a book-length poem that's a family history, elegy, sort of uses Homeric poetry and epic to describe a trip from Argentina to India to seek a cure for his mother's cancer. It's very mythic, and it's just, it's hard to find a place to pick out to read. So I'll just pick out from a part that has a little bit of repetition, because it doesn't really begin and end. It does have chapters, but whatever. I'm going to stop talking myself in circles. This is what speaks. Sorry, the book is called Another Life by Daniel Ibarra. This is what speaks when no one speaks. I was in the mandir waiting for Baba to come out. The sun had risen, and then a language spoke to me. Coarse is the voice that turned into a tree and still has lips. The old man with ebony skin, no flag around his neck, drew in a long, thin thread of breath, blew out a tiny ball without an aftertaste, and looked at me as if to say, it's your turn now. Forget about what brought you here, your school, your friends, the girl you like, your other life. This is what speaks when no one speaks. And the fingers of the day wake up the sky and wash its eyes of fog. And everyone moves toward the temple doors. They want to get there first, like the wind, when it brings the murmur of the waves all dressed in white, who rise and hurry to the shore with open mouths. And that baby monkey, my sister inches toward it. She wants to touch that fur with her own hands. And now out of the blue, the mother monkey's here. She howls and grabs my sister's clothes and hair. She's furious. More monkeys come down from the trees around my sister, like lava lighting up. A monkey in the jungle, that's how the faithful show themselves to God. And the man filling bags with ashes, under the eaves shaped like an insect wing, he shovels cosmic ash into each bag beneath an insect wing. Like crickets singing to the night, huddled in nothingness, in a force field of sound, that's what mantras are like crickets everywhere. And what would my father, the tiller, say if he could see me sitting here alone, eating rice, wearing a white kurta? Like a cage in God's garden, that banyan fig, with aerial roots growing downward from the branches, to drive into the ground and garden of God. And I heard the bird circling over a long omen, its little bird claws scratching it, like the spider turning its prey around and around, engulfing it in thread. That's how the tailor wraps my mother in a sari, like the spider. The goddess looks at me from the glass box with all her heads, 5 heads stuck to each other. She trails me with her open eyes as I make my way to the temple at 3 in the morning. Like those black ants appearing out of the blue, taking away the wandering leaves dispersed by wind. That's how rickshaws appear and take us away, like ants. And that woman who offered me brown and white bits of coconut as I drifted through the ashram alone near the waterfall, the coconut woman. And the gods are watching us, and the gods are there watching us. The washerwomen I saw when I climbed the hill. They shine, all dressed in white, in the valley, washing white sheets, the water shining between the reef and fields, the hills. I'll stop there. Should we do a Q&A?
Yes, we should. I have a cue to get us going, which is, I love that you called out Forrest Gander and chose to read that poem. People who were in the translation theory class, we read his homage to translation in Toward a Fahrenheit Miss Ben, right? And I think it's on the top of my syllabus there, contrasting Frost saying poetry is what gets lost in translation with him saying, I looked at translation to refresh American English.
Yeah, which is sort of also Weinberger's position, but Forrest is just an incredible musician of the language and finds, he really opened my ears to the possibilities of what can be done in a translation, so not to think of it in terms of like scarcity and being stuck in constraint and having to sort of work your way out of chains in a tank, but like thinking of it as, wow, I have room to sort of recreate things and to respond in ways that I think hadn't really, when I encountered translation, been talked about by too many in my, to my knowledge at the time. So, yeah.
That's great. I wonder, too, as like a corollary to that, have you found that your own translation practice has done work on your poetic practice? Like, do you write, do you feel your own writing shift from your translation work?
Yes.
Say more.
Yes, I translate all the time. And sometimes it's, translation is a wonderful distraction when you are, between things you're writing. It's a way of writing. It's a way of sort of method writing, I think. It's a way of writing with extreme constraints. And it exercises all kinds of muscles. But more than that, it just tells me so much about, it puts me in conversation, intimate conversation with the people I'm translating, and so I've noticed that my work has grown in the direction of people's work. I mean, definitely Valerie has been an enormous influence on my work, and that was something I didn't expect when I first started translating her work. Same with Maggie Negroni. I mean, her work has also sort of entered me as I've entered it. And so in that sense, and then also, yes, like what I was saying earlier about just sort of the process of language being, sort of unlocking it, to use a press metaphor, moving it around, and then, locking it up again, it's a really eye-opening thing if you all have any opportunity to work with translation in any way. It can really teach you a bit about how languages sort of function so differently, teach you sort of the things that are so special to English. You sort of get a distance from English, and it gives you, I think, sometimes a great freedom and sense of possibility. Yes?
What made you want to get into publishing?
That's a great question.
Could you
So,
repeat the question?
what made me want to get into publishing? I was very eager. There are some really wonderful translation presses whose books and whose thinking about publishing have inspired me for a long time. But I didn't ever have the thought of getting into it myself until I went on a Fulbright grant to Argentina. And had this sort of comical moment where my husband had, 8 suitcases. We had to get a scale and weigh them of books. And this feeling I had of despair was like, I just spent months there, and I did not get as far as I had hoped on a translation project that I was working on. And it was very much a labor of love translation with no assurances. And I thought, God, this is the most valuable work, is the stuff that's hard and has no assurances. And I also just felt the weight of all that I will never translate. It was like, man, I really want to make some room here if I can. So I sort of, I just started a minor in literary translation at the college where I teach. And so I saw a little opportunity there to connect this in some way. And the students have really just like you guys have this amazing book art center. It's really nice to, be doing these real things, these concrete material things with poetry. It doesn't just live in your head, it lives in the world. Publishing creates reading communities. It empowers all kinds of new possibilities. So I really like having that new element in my teaching, and it's been very rewarding, but I have to say the timing was awful because it was right about when we were about half a year older than COVID, or a year older than COVID. So it's not been, the kind of hopping from book fair to book fair that I hoped it would be, but it's been very rewarding. But yeah, I think that feeling of wow, I would love to give room for translators who have these pet projects that are very important to them, even if it's this guy's first book, or even if it's a young translator going to Columbia and reading all the books and thinking, man, why are there no women translators? So I think there's room, and there's still much, much more room. So you should do it.
So as someone who is obviously fluent in multiple languages, and who's a poet and translator, do you work translating your own work? Do you write primarily in English? How does that interplay with your different selves and hats?
I have never, it's so funny because I consider myself, I consider the work that I write really weird in translation. So for all my sense of possibility, I'm like, oh, how are you going to do that? My husband is actually a poet in Spanish. And so the idea has come up that he might translate something of mine. And actually, I owe him big time to translate something of his, which is how we actually met. And then that didn't pan out as we thought. It's hard to translate your partner's work. Slip there. But I think it's, there's such an interesting thing about, and I really admire Maria Negroni and Valerie Marcasso because they speak English wonderfully. And they give their work to translators in part because they really appreciate the separateness of the so they could certainly translate their own work, but they see translation as something that is its own sort of recreation or rewriting of the work. And so and they respect my intuition and my separateness. So I think I would not probably accept in some exercise that I would do for myself, translate my work, but it would be really interesting to see how I might do this. My husband's even weirder a poet than me, so we could do this to each other as some kind of marital exercise. If we were easier, all the punning is not fun. Yes.
Do you have a favorite poet or a favorite translator? I don't know if that
Oh, many. I mean, yes. I have many favorite poets and translators. Geez. Why am I never prepared for this question? Ever. Like, I have like a new favorite poet every minute. Well, we mentioned Forrest Gander. Oh my goodness. Forrest Gander's work has like been so instrumental to me as translator and as poet. I'm also a very big fan of the work and like big, I'd say, like copycat, shameless copycat of everything ever said by the Canadian poet Erin Murray. I just like hang on her every word that she publishes because it's so generative to me. I really, and yes. And then I have there are a lot of poet translators out there, all in one, whose work is really important to me, like Anna Dini, Don Mi Choi, Daniel Brzezinski, Sawako Nakayasu. I could just keep talking. I'm a big, I'll write you a list of recommendations, but I really love the work of poet translators. And it's funny because actually, come to think of it, Maria Negroni, who I translated, is also a poet translator into Spanish, and so is Valerie. So I think across languages, I tend to like people who would define themselves as poet translators. Like Dan. Yeah. Exactly like Dan. I didn't mention Dan because he's right here.
Thank you. There'll be more of an opportunity
Yeah, we
to
can
chat
just
more
chat.
informally, but maybe I'll close us down.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me here. It's just been so lovely and so generative. And you guys have been great. My weakness.
I'll just say very quickly, first of all, our next visiting writer event happens next month. It's Jack Wang. It will also be in person. Jack Wang is a tremendous fiction writer. His collection of short stories just won all of the prizes in Canada, just all of them. He's wonderful, and I think some of you are going to be reading his stories in James's classes, but you'll see me badgering you about that, and people out there, you'll also see me badgering you about it. So that's coming up in about a month. And as a reminder, Michelle's books and the books that she's published are over there for sale. The broadside that we made together, how do you go back? There we go, this way. That guy is over there. If you are one of the students who helped us make it, please, you earned yourself a copy. Everyone else, you didn't earn it, you got to pay for it. But those are all there for sale, and help yourself to refreshments. Dear college students, take a piece of citrus before you go. Thank you all so much. Don't get scurvy in college. Thank you all for coming out tonight. It means the world to see all your faces here, and just please join me in thanking Michelle Gil-Montero one more time.